Hey everybody, Chuck Holton here coming to you from my studio in Panama. Many of you have already heard that there was an active shooter at a Catholic church in a suburb of Minneapolis. Now we're going to talk about how to keep your church safe from attacks like this, as churches are soft targets and very often they are chosen specifically for that purpose. We're going to talk about some concrete steps that you can take to make your church safer by the training and church security team and things like that. Also, I wanted to point out that I made a two-part documentary about church security several years ago in conjunction with my friend Tim Miller and Lionheart International Services Group. Lionheart is a group of security professionals that goes around the country and trains churches, church security teams to protect their congregations. And they are the premier church security training organization in the country. When churches are targeted, one of the big reasons is because they are known to be places of safety that are supposed to be open to all. And there's a real contradiction in terms of saying we're going to lock down our church, and yet we still want it to be open and welcoming to all who come in. Churches are supposed to be hospitals for hurting and broken people. Unfortunately, very often those hurting and broken people bring their hurt and brokenness along with them when they come to the church. And there are reasons that you need to take it seriously in your congregation and have a plan, have a security team, and not just for a bunch of guys carrying pistols. I'm all for that. I think that one of the big mistakes that's made in our country whenever something like this happens, and you can virtually guarantee that Governor Tim Walz is going to come out and say something very soon about the need for more gun control. And the problem with that is that what you are doing if you try to take everybody's guns away or make it much more difficult for law-abiding people to get a gun is you are just making everybody more vulnerable to the bad actors in the society who don't follow the law to begin with. So you can pass all the laws you want. There's already lots of laws against killing people at churches or anywhere else. But if you pass more laws to make it more difficult for your law-abiding citizens to protect themselves, what you're doing is you're saying we're going to make everybody safer by making them more vulnerable. And that is not a good plan. It's not one that I agree with in any way, shape, or form. But you're going to hear a lot of that in the coming days. So I want to show you a story I made about a training that we did in Chicago with Lionheart International Services Group.
June 19th, 2019. A Syrian refugee was arrested in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for plotting to blow up a local church. His intent was to inspire other church attacks in the name of ISIS. Former FBI agent Mark Lundgren warns that an attack like this could have far-reaching consequences.
If 2 or 3 successful attacks on churches occur, what we're going to see is a conversation over the dinner table on Saturday night. Honey, should we take the kids to church tomorrow, or should we just live stream this? And if you don't think that's going to impact the very ministry model of every church in America, you probably just haven't thought about it.
Many churches these days have some sort of security team, but Lundgren is working to help these teams network with those from other churches by starting the Secure Church Network, an association of church safety and security leaders who meet to share tips and tactics for keeping their congregations safe.
So what we want to do is create an environment where worry-free worship can occur.
At a recent Secure Church event near Chicago, several hundred attendees got a chance to do scenario-based training aimed at approaching security as a ministry. Former Secret Service agent Tim Miller led the training.
So church security is unique because the skills we need week after week are largely not firearm skills. They're skills like talking people down. We call it de-escalation. They're skills like dealing with mentally ill people. They're skills like understanding that people come into the church with a variety of addictions. And how we respond to them really matters because on the one hand, we want hurting people to come, but on the other hand, we want to keep the congregation safe.
You're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to be a victim of a mass shooter attack in a church. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be training and prepared for it. More likely, you're going to have a medical emergency or maybe a mentally ill person come into your church, and those kinds of things need to be prepared for as well.
Now, church security is different because as churches are welcoming, inviting places, and security tends to keep people away. So it's important that we train church security folks with the mindset of ministry.
I just don't know any church leader that wants their gatherings to start to feel like some kind of an armed encampment. But the good news, it seems to me, is that there are practical ways of increasing security in the life of a religious community or church without losing that sense that it is still a very warm and welcoming place.
You see the kind of training that we do there, and you can see why it's so necessary by looking at what happened here today in Minneapolis. Now, imagine your kids are going to this private school at a Catholic church, and you hear that there's been an active violence event at that location. What's your first response? What do? You are not going to be able to go and protect your kids. You're going to have to be able to trust that the school or the church where your kids are going has got its own security in place, and that's why this is so important. People who aren't there, like the parents, the loved ones, whatever, it's much worse in their minds than it likely is in reality on the ground, because if you're on the ground, you know whether or not you are in danger. But if you're not there, you don't know if that threat is continuing or not. And people get frantic to get there and to get their kids out of there and that sort of thing. All of that to say that if you are ever in a situation like this, try to stay calm. And the typical advice that you hear in an active violence situation is run, hide, fight, right? So run away if you can, hide if you can't, and fight if you must. And I think that's good advice for anybody who doesn't have any training or capability to actually do something about it. What I've always said, though, is that if you're a grown man and you find yourself in a situation like this, your priorities should be the opposite of that. It should be fight, hide, run. The first thing you should do is run to the sound of the threat and do what you can to stop it, even if it's throwing a chair at the guy or distracting him so somebody else can tackle him or anything like that. If all of the men present follow the run, hide, fight mantra, men can run faster than women can. And so what you end up having is the most vulnerable, the children and the women, end up being the ones who are victimized most because the men have all fled. So we need to think about this ahead of time, guys. And we need to say, if I'm ever in a situation like this, I am going to be, even if I have to sacrifice my body, I'm going to put myself between the most vulnerable and the threat. And I'm going to do what I can to put a stop to it. Now, look, even if you get shot, in today's day and age, with the technology that we have and the knowledge that we have about treating that kind of trauma, you have a more than 80% chance of survival. 88% of all gunshot wounds are survived in the United States because we have a lot of stop the bleed training and things like that. Even if you don't have a weapon on you, a tourniquet is the next best thing because you can literally save a life by stopping the bleeding if somebody is bleeding out. So that's step one. And ladies, how hard is it to put a tourniquet in your purse? The tourniquets that I carry is not much bigger than this AirPods case when it's folded up. So what I'm getting at is that if a guy walks in with a gun and starts shooting people, and all the men present converge on that guy, a few of those guys are going to get shot, most likely. But they're going to overwhelm the assailant, take him down, and save lots of lives in the process. If there are a few people around that are carrying tourniquets, then the guys who do get shot are likely to survive until the paramedics get there. What we talk about with church security training is that you should have concentric rings of security. You have security around the pulpit, you have security around the sanctuary, and you have security around the church campus. And that includes security officers in the parking lot. Our church in West Virginia, we have gone to that model. And it actually is very helpful because we've been able to thwart, for example, robberies, smash and grab robberies in our parking lot. It doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge to go get a gun and figure out which end you point at your target. I guarantee you most of these shooters have very little training, probably have never fired 100 rounds in training. That's why if you are a member of that church or a member of the community who makes it your business to train and to go out once a month and go through 200 or 300 rounds, you will be very well positioned to put a stop to the threat. I remember a active violence event that took place at a church in White Settlement near Fort Worth, Texas, a few years ago. And a guy walked into the sanctuary during the service, pulled out a sawed-off shotgun, and shot the very nice deacon who was coming up to welcome him into the church. Then he shot another guy right next to him. And before he could shoot anybody else, a guy carrying a pistol from across the sanctuary, but he was a firearms instructor, so he was very well trained, pulled his pistol, aimed, and shot the guy right between the eyes from clear across the sanctuary. Now, there were 6 people in that sanctuary who had firearms on their person. The other 4 didn't even have a chance to, because this guy managed to put a stop to the threat very fast. And so it's tragic for the 2 guys who were killed because they were shot at point blank range with the 12 gauge. But it could have been a whole lot worse because there were a couple hundred people in that sanctuary at the time. So that's why training is so important. And one of the reasons why I think the way Lionheart does their training is so good is because they use that Milo range training system, that video-based laser training thing, because they've got over 1,000 different scenarios that they can load up in there. And the scenario actually changes based on your actions. So if you shoot the bad guy and miss, the bad guy keeps on doing his thing. But if you hit him, then he falls down. If you don't shoot him and you say, drop your weapon, and you point your weapon at him, the computer that runs that thing is smart enough to know to listen to what you're saying. And the guy, in some cases, might drop the weapon and put his hands up. And then you don't have to shoot. So they do a whole lot more than just target practice. It's more de-escalation training on steroids. It's a very expensive, it's like a $70,000 system. So if you can get the Lionheart crew into your church, or even do a citywide training for all the churches in your city, I highly recommend it, because these guys are the best training you can get for your church security team. Carry a good first aid kit and do a lot of medical training. You should perhaps, if I was on a church security team in Canada and we could not get a permit to carry a firearm, there are other tools available that are less than lethal that might be available to you, like bear spray, or there are non-lethal air pistols that basically shoot a paintball, but it's made of PVC plastic, that will not kill somebody, but it will certainly make them rethink their life choices if they get shot by those things. And so if a guy comes in with a knife or whatever and starts causing problems in your church, you can chase him out of there with one of those. Here in Panama, I can get a firearm, and I own one here at our house, but they also sell those air pistols. They run off a CO2 cartridge and they shoot these PVC paintball things. I carry in my truck, I carry bear spray, I carry bladed weapons, I carry blunt weapons, and very often will carry a firearm if I'm going someplace I think that it's necessary. So I have lots of options available to me. Going right to the firearm is not always the best course of action. I highly recommend that you go and watch Tim Miller's videos. Also go watch the Active Self-Protection channel here on YouTube. My friend John Correa runs that, does a very good job of training you on real life situations, how to deal with that kind of stuff. There obviously will be a lot more information that comes out about this event in Minneapolis over the coming days and weeks. And let's just hope and pray that the people who are injured will survive, and that the police are able to thwart these kinds of events in the future. And there's no question about it in my mind.